Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about designing for nervous system safety, and it's going to be a good one. So let's jump right in. All right. So this is a little picture of me. It's taken in a lilac garden, which I believe actually might be closed now. Hope not. Super bummer. That place was beautiful. As you can see, I'm having a great time there. So welcome back, and let's talk about designing for nervous system safety, spaces that help people heal and thrive. But first, you might want to know who am I, why you might want to tune into what I have to say. My name is Katie Titi, and I'm the founder of Soul Sanctuary. I have over 10 years each experience in corporate interior design, workplace strategy, personal development coaching, and more. I help entrepreneurs, and specifically, most often, solopreneurs, transform both their space and themselves. My trauma-informed approach and evidence-based approach blends strategy with soul, so you don't just redesign a room or space, you create a sanctuary that heals, inspires, and amplifies your gifts as a sensitive, neurodivergent solopreneur. I also do work sometimes with corporations as well. So if that is you, this is still a good place for you to hang out. If you're ready for a space and business that grows with you, you are in the right place. So thanks for joining. Let's dive right in. So overall vibe of this presentation, we'll talk about designing for nervous system safety. The purpose is to bridge trauma-informed design in everyday life and physical space. So we'll define nervous system safe and provide some sensory examples and some reframe, right? So refuge is regulation and not indulgence. I think oftentimes people think of refuge and they think of some super luxurious space. And while that absolutely can be true, and we love those kind of spaces, it doesn't have to be super expensive or super luxurious. And in fact, you can create something that feels super luxurious without having to spend a ton of money, which is great news, especially if you're trying to create something with, you know, on a budget. So let's talk about why nervous system safety matters. A person's nervous system is the operating system behind every action. So whether you realize it or not, we are all working from a particular program, subconscious programming, and sometimes and oftentimes that is really dictated, not dictated, but by influenced by maybe some things that have happened to us in the past that have transformed our physiology, our energy, and it can impact how we show up and behave in the world, which can be great, or sometimes it can be less than ideal for what we want to create. So when a space, and by the way, spaces do have the capacity to dysregulate people, which sucks. We want to do the opposite of that. When a space dysregulates people, they lose capacity to create. Creativity, clarity, collaboration, and emotional availability all kind of tank. When a space regulates people, performance, morale, engagement, humanity, creativity, and lots of other good things are on the rise. So good design isn't just a pretty space. It can be very conducive for good nervous system conditions and outcomes, and that's why we do it. Well, it's one of the many reasons why we do it, but it's probably one of the most important, which is why I love it so much. So what is nervous system safety? It is the felt sense of stability, support, and predictability in an environment. And it's not just about calm, it's appropriate stimulation, clarity, and choice. And that's really important to identify because when we only design for calm and we don't include inspirational cues, we can really have a missed opportunity. And also, it can really take people out in the way that they cocoon too much. And while we do like a lot of cocooning and healing spaces, we still have to have a point of stimulation and inspiration so that people can, be called out of the cocoon again when it's time, if that makes sense. So space that communicates safety and validation, key things that you want to convey: you are not under threat, your needs matter, and the environment supports how you function. So it should feel nourishing, it should feel validating, and it should be removing as many threats as possible. And by the way, we often, tend to design for that kind of in an overall fashion. But depending on your occupants, your needs, and your specific goals, um, your specific spaces you're going to want to design it for that, because we all have different things that we consider a threat. We all have different, and there's some general overall things that we can kind of um, often design for to enhance certain things we want and prevent things we don't want. But individuals have their own threats. I know someone who actually has a very difficult time during the holiday because of the past trauma that happened around that time of year. And for that reason, she actually really struggles around the holidays and is triggered by things that would make other people happy. And so everyone is different. Everyone is different. And that's why it's important to design for groups and communities, but also understand that individuals have their own needs that come up that we have to handle. Maybe with policies when the space obviously can be conducive of it, etc. So that is a key thing to note. There's a balance between the overall and then still recognizing the individual within that plan. So the science behind it, brief overview. Stress and environment research shows that lighting affects cortisol and melatonin cycles. That's key. Clutter increases cognitive load and irritability. You may have heard something along those lines. It's definitely true. Noise can elevate adrenaline and heart rate. Biophilic elements can reduce stress, anxiety, and blood pressure, amongst other things. And predictable space layouts reduce vigilance, right? So if you have someone who has hypervigilance as a characteristic, whether they, are on the neurodivergent spectrum or have something else going on, that's definitely key to know. Predictable space layouts can really, really help with that. And choice and autonomy regulate the vagus nerve. One thing I do want to mention too, with the predictable space layouts reducing vigilance, we do still need to have cocooning spaces within that. So that's also still a balance, right? And I can share some examples of that. Actually, that'd be a good, I keep going through these videos with you guys and just realizing that, where I can have like a micro, like a video moment, like, oh, I should do a video on that specific topic. So I think I will. Common environmental triggers can be harsh lighting. Now, if you've ever walked through like a big box store or a grocery store with harsh lighting, especially if you're neurodivergent, you might have noticed how that can feel like an assault on the system for some of us, for many of us. So harsh lighting can be an issue. Noisy or chaotic environments can absolutely be an issue, especially when you're trying to do focused work or focus on a task. Overcrowded layouts can be really, really triggering, especially when you have people just like sitting on top of one another, not literally, but maybe too close to each other in a layout, not fun. Lack of privacy can be jarring. Unpredictable movement of flow can also be triggering. And that could be something like poor wayfinding, right? A confusion that you have in your space could cause a micro threat. So for example, if you have a space that is doing double duty as like storage and a aisleway, it doesn't always cause an issue, but it could cause an issue if you've got one person that's using it as an aisleway and another person it's using it storage, and they're both not paying attention to each other and have bump into each other. That sort of thing can happen. And it's not usually, something like that isn't usually a major threat, but it's something to keep in mind because we often have space to do multiple functions. And when we do, we should try our very bestest, our very darndest, to see about how we can make those functions complementary instead of conflicting. Visual clutter can be super triggering. If you've ever had like a bunch of stuff out on your desk and it's just like constantly reminding you of a to-do list, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, or if it's taking time for you to rifle through your items to figure out where your stuff is, that can be stressful, it can be time consuming, and it can be distracting as well. Cold or sterile materials can really remove us and disconnect us from the nature and humanity that we want to naturally gravitate towards. So that can pose a challenge. Absence of nature cues, again, we want to be around as many nature cues as possible. They do some really good work with regard to uh, physiological reactions in the body, but also they can do double duty with inspiration. They can often be quite beautiful and inspiring as well, which is one of those things we want to include in any kind of space, healing or otherwise. Okay. Let's talk about principles of nervous system safe design. So things that are principles, go-tos, predictability, clear flow, intuitive layouts, and recognizable patterns. Key. Choice and autonomy. This is a big one. This is a big one. The more people have like options and choice in space, the more empowered they feel, the more in control they have over their part of the environment. So in my line of work, I've often recommended people, if you can, like, even if you're working in like a big open office environment and you have like shared resources and utilities and those kinds of things, it can often be helpful to actually provide people stuff at their own desk that they can adjust, like whether it's lighting, whether it's like a white noise machine or whatever it might be for that individual. And some things can be more helpful and effective than others, and actually lighting is a great one. In my experience, I've seen way too many office environments, for example, that are overlit. And in fact, one of the worst overlit experiences I've ever had that was surprising to me. I'm not surprised when I see it in big box stores or grocery stores, because it's inexpensive. People need to be able to see what they're looking at, and there's also, I think, probably an element of theft prevention as well. And so there's all of that going on. I will say I have had a positive experience grocery shopping like once. That wasn't a farmer's market. Farmers markets are great if you can do those. But there was one in DC. I want to say it was like Dean and DeLuca or something. And the lighting was perfect, right? It wasn't overlit. It was just great. You could see everything, but it wasn't overwhelming. But one space that I was actually really surprised, it was like just terribly overlit and just really, really straining on the eye. It was like overwhelming. It was a nail place that I used to go to when I lived in the Boston area years ago. And it was a beautiful space. The people working there were really, really nice. They offered some really great packages as far as like nails to be done. But it was so overlit. And I thought to myself, oh my God. So first of all, the people working here, it must be like a lot of overwhelming light and strain for them, especially because they have all this overhead lights, they've got sconces, they've got all that. It was so overlit. And then they also had their task lights. And I thought to myself, it's really overlit for them. It's also very overlit for me as a client where I'm trying to go in and relax. I feel like I need to have like a face mask on to even get through this experience and leave like at any kind of a relaxed way. And it's interesting because you're, sitting there getting a pedicure, thinking I should be feeling relaxed right now, but I feel so on. And why is that? Well, lighting plays a huge role in those kinds of things. So it's something to consider. It really, really is. It can make a huge difference and really make a space, it can really be the difference between a winning space and a failing space with regard to things like that. So, yeah, if customer relaxation, healing, etc. is, and I'm in no way shaming the people that created that space. I found it to be very ineffective as far as relaxation for me. So yeah, lighting can make a huge difference, winning or failing a customer experience like that. So choice and autonomy, quiet sounds, yeah. So that can be huge, giving people the choice, their own adjustments. It can feel really personalized. It really makes people feel validated, seen, understood. It also really allows them to just like pick their own sensory adventure, if you will. Then there's modulation, not minimalism. Balanced stimulation, not overwhelming or barren, right? We want to strike that happy balance, which we've talked about, and we'll continue to talk about how to do that. Principles of nervous system safe design, part 2. Biophilia, nature cues that ground the body. Again, we've talked about this. Biophilia is a love of nature. And so when we find nature cues that ground the body, it can do two things, right? It can do have positive impacts on the body. It also has the tendency to really inspire us with its inspiration and beauty. So that does double duty in both those categories. One of the reasons why I love it so much. Texture and material honesty. So organic materials providing warmth and safety cues. That's a big one. And again, you know, texture is a really individualized, personalized thing. Some folks, you might find that they love a certain texture, and some people really might hate it. And so that's another reason why choice can be so important. So for example, like if you're designing a retreat center and you've got all these different like pillows or cushions or something to that effect, and you might want to have a number of different, depending on what you're trying to create. But you might want to have a few different types in case someone really finds, you know, especially if you've got a neurodivergent population working with you, or if it's just you that's neurodivergent, certain textures can really throw people off. And so while one person really might love the feeling of felt and it gives them a lot of warmth, some people might, you know, touch it and go, ooh, like that's not for me. And so it's really nice to have options, especially where we have differences in how we experience senses in space, and where you know, sense and tactile things can really actually bring up memories for people, strong memories too, potentially strong memories. And so we really want to be cognizant of that. And I personally believe that if we can provide the variety or, you know, various things to people, then we're going to have a stronger outcome, because people are really going to feel like they fit in to that space. They'll feel not fit in, but belong. And belonging is important, no matter who you are. So we want people to feel a sense of belonging via the senses as much as we possibly can. And when we miss something, we want to pay attention to it and adjust accordingly. Refuge and prospect, spaces where you can see what's happening and feel protected. That is, and you know, I actually love, so I have 2 cats, and I love watching them and their behaviors. It's always so fascinating to me, kind of seeing like what they're going to do next. And one of the things that they do, and you may have noticed this if you have a cat or have been around them, they like to do this thing where they perch, and they'll get like on a cushion somewhere up high, or maybe something that's just like a comfortable seat for them, so that that way they can feel cozy, but they can also see everything that's going on. And so the combination of refuge and prospect can be really powerful as well for humans, where we feel comfortable, but we can also kind of you know, easily survey what's going on in this space. So it's really wonderful. We can grab that balance too. Visual safety cues. And then let's see, visual safety cues. I think visual safety cues, and then I might wrap. Yeah, I'm going to do visual safety cues, and then we'll wrap part 1, and we'll save part 2 for the next segment here. So let's talk a little bit about some visual safety cues since we're on that topic. Warm layered lighting, soft contrast, not harsh transitions, gentle organic forms, natural materials. We already talked about that to some extent. Cohesive color palettes, curved pathways, also curved objects. And the interesting thing about curved objects is that we don't need or want to have curved objects everywhere. For a number of different reasons. Certainly how we perceive a space, the dynamic aspects of it and whatnot. We don't need or want to have curved everything, but one of the things that's been studied, and I can share more detail in the study on this if you're interested, but there's been studies done on this where what we have curved objects and curved aspects in space. What it does is it is a threat reduction for people from a perception standpoint. And so then it allows us to provide just an even greater sense of threat removal in a space, which can be wonderful. Now, that might mean the difference between having, sharp edges or corners on a table versus something smoother. It might be decor elements that are less pokey, right? There's all different ways we can explore that. And it's going to depend on your space and, again, who your occupants are. Obviously, if you have, well, not obviously, but if you have people in a space, if you have children in a space, for example, you want to be careful specifically about sharp corners or glass or things like that, because children, I've ever heard the term, or if you've ever actually done it yourself as a parent, when you childproof a space, it means you make sure that they can't get into shit that could hurt them. It means that, it's one of the reasons why we have something called tempered glass, because regular glass shards can be exceptionally dangerous when broken. It's why we, see, even when we have sometimes rectangular or square furniture, why it has curved edges as opposed to sharp edges. People, even children or adults, adults can run into them too, right? You get a nasty bruise from running into a sharp edge. So there are a number of different reasons and frameworks for why we might choose curved or round objects in a space, or specific structural elements of a space that are curved or rounded. And again, it's because of the reduction in threat perception, and in my opinion, the reduction in threat in general. I happen to be a little bit clumsy. And so if I think that, I might be running into an object here, there, or wherever, I'm going to probably not want to pick sharp edges just for me and my clumsy ass. So that's something to consider as well. Curves can be a really great tool. We just don't want to overdo it. And again, that'll depend on your space, your audience, and your goals. Plants integrated naturally and not decoratively. So we're going for authenticism. It's not just about, throwing a plant in here or there. Nothing wrong with that, but let's be intentional about placement, and also let's consider allergies. Many people have allergies, and pets have allergies, or things that are just toxic for them. So depending on, again, your audience, you may have to use faux plants, which I know not everyone loves, but it can really help with things like that. And if you are committed to using real plants, which there's a lot of great reasons to use real plants in your space if you can, then you'll just need to do the research on what's going to be appropriate for your occupants. Yeah. And by the way, I think I've talked about this in another one of my presentations here. Plants can cleanse the air. And studies have shown that. Studies that are 50 years old have shown that. But unless you put a ton of plants in your space that are air cleansing, it's not like you have a fully blown filter in your space. So I just want to make that clear too. I think if you're going to have air cleansing plants in your space for that reason, you probably want to have them right next to you so you get the most benefit. But they're not there to be a full-blown filter for your space. So just FYI, it's a boost, it's a benefit, but unless you are just living green, it's not just going to cleanse the air in your entire space. So just to be clear about that. One of the things we also want to do is clear sightlines so the nervous system experiences less strain and effort scanning through threats. We talked a little bit about that before. So what are clear sightlines? It's when you can see across a space and kind of identify what's happening everywhere around you, without wondering like what's behind a corner, or what's behind this, that, or the other. And we can't perfectly do this all of the time because objects and functions have to exist in space. And also refuge and cocoons need to, and when I say cocoon, I mean like spaces for refuge, spaces for rest, and refuge. Those also have to exist in space. So we do our best to balance where we believe that the sight lines need to be as much as possible while still satisfying the requirements of the space, the functionality, and also the need for refuge too. So that's important. All right, well, let's wrap on this part 1, and we'll jump into part 2. We'll continue to talk about designing for nervous system safety, and I'll also give you a few examples of what can really trigger, some visual examples of what can really trigger, negative responses in space, and positive ones too. We'll show some contrast visually. So where I didn't really show any visuals in part 1 for this presentation, in part 2 of this presentation, I am going to be showing a couple visuals. I'll let you know when those happen. So, if you're listening to this in your car, doing chores, whatever you might be doing, you'll know when to pause and tune in visually if you can do that at that point, because I really do want you to see these visuals. Sometimes it helps to just see things in different ways, experience things in different ways, right? If you're listening, if you're watching, we all have our strengths in learning and consuming information and digesting information. So, but I think, visuals can be a pretty powerful one. So we'll take a look at some images in the next presentation, and then we'll wrap. So hope you enjoyed that. I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions or any specific topics you would like me to cover with regard to designing for nervous system safety, I'm absolutely happy to explore those. Just give me a holler in the comments. Don't actually holler in the comments. Say hello and ask me a question kindly. And we'll be happy to answer whatever you have there. All right, we'll see you for the next one. Bye.